The Puppy Who Learned to Bake Bread. Once upon a time, in a cozy little town nestled between emerald hills and whispering woods, there lived a puppy named Max. Max was a bouncy, brown and white bundle of energy, with ears that flopped with every joyful bound and sparkling eyes full of curiosity. He lived with his family in a cheery yellow house at the end of Maple Lane, where the sun painted golden patterns on the kitchen floor each morning. Max loved his home and he loved his family. A kind baker named Mrs. Harper, her gentle husband Mr. Harper, and their giggly little daughter Sophie. But more than anything, Max loved the smells that drifted from the kitchen every day. The rich, buttery aroma of freshly baked bread, the sweet tang of cinnamon rolls, and the comforting scent of warm cookies cooling on the windowsill. Each morning, Mrs. Harper would rise before dawn, tie her favourite apron around her waist, and begin her daily baking. Max would always be there, tail wagging, nose twitching, watching as she mixed, kneaded, and shaped dough into delicious treats for the bakery in town. Sometimes Sophie would join, her laughter filling the kitchen as she sprinkled flour everywhere, sometimes even on Max's nose. But Max never minded. He simply wished he could help too. One sunny morning, Max awoke to the sound of birds chirping and the smell of something new. Peeking into the kitchen, he saw Mrs. Harper carefully reading a recipe from a big, old book. Sophie was away at school, and Mr. Harper was busy in the garden. Mrs. Harper sighed and looked at her flour-dusted hands. "I wish I had a little helper today," she said softly. Max's tail thumped excitedly. Maybe today was the day he could finally help. He padded over and nudged Mrs. Harper's leg gently. "Oh, Max, you want to help me bake today?" Mrs. Harper smiled, scratching behind his ear. "Well, you can be my special assistant." Max's heart leaped with joy. He watched as Mrs. Harper gathered the ingredients: flour, yeast, water, sugar, and a pinch of salt. She measured, poured, and mixed, explaining each step as she went. Max listened as carefully as he could, his nose twitching with anticipation. First, Mrs. Harper poured warm water into a large bowl. "This wakes up the yeast," she explained. Max watched as tiny bubbles formed like magic on the surface. Next, she added flour, and the kitchen filled with a soft, powdery cloud. Max sneezed, making Mrs. Harper laugh. "Bless you, Max," she said, handing him a little chef's hat. Max felt proud to wear it, even if it kept slipping over his eyes. Mrs. Harper showed Max how to knead the dough. She pressed, folded, and turned it with practiced hands. Max tried to help by placing his paws gently on the dough, mimicking her movements. The dough stuck to his fur, but Mrs. Harper only smiled and wiped him clean. "It's okay, Max. Baking takes practice." As the dough rose, Mrs. Harper told Max stories about her childhood, how she learned to bake from her grandmother in a tiny kitchen just like this one. Max listened, curled up at her feet, dreaming of the day he could bake a loaf of bread all by himself. The dough was ready to shape. Mrs. Harper rolled it into a long, soft log and placed it in a bread pan. "Now, we wait," she said, covering it with a cloth. Max waited patiently, sniffing the air as the dough grew bigger and puffier. Finally, it was time to bake. Mrs. Harper slid the pan into the warm oven, the kitchen filled with the most wonderful smell, a warm, yeasty aroma that made Max's tummy rumble. When the bread was golden and crusty, Mrs. Harper pulled it from the oven and let it cool on the windowsill. "Thank you for your help today, Max," Mrs. Harper said, breaking off a tiny piece of bread and offering it to him. Max munched it happily, feeling proud of his very first baking adventure. That night, as the family gathered around the table, Mrs. Harper told Sophie and Mr. Harper all about Max's hard work. Sophie squealed with delight and gave Max a big hug. "You're the best baking buddy ever, Max," she said. But as Max curled up in his bed, he wondered, could he learn to bake bread all by himself, just like Mrs. Harper? The next morning, Max woke up before anyone else. The sun had just begun to peek through the curtains, painting the kitchen in soft golden light. Max tiptoed quietly to the counter and gazed up at the recipe book. It was open to the bread recipe. Max's tail wagged with determination. Today, he would try to bake bread on his own. He nudged the flour bag with his nose until it tipped over, sending a soft cloud of flour onto the floor. Max dipped his paw into the flour, spreading it on the counter, just like Mrs. Harper did. Next, he found the yeast, little round grains in a jar. He remembered how Mrs. Harper used warm water to wake up the yeast. Max carefully nudged the faucet with his nose, filling a bowl with water. It splashed everywhere, but Max didn't mind. He sprinkled the yeast into the bowl and watched as little bubbles formed. He wagged his tail with excitement. Next came the flour. Max poured at the bag until the flour tumbled into the bowl. A little too much, but Max hoped that was okay. He added a pinch of salt, maybe a big pinch, because his paws were clumsy. Then he remembered the sugar. He found the sugar jar and used his nose to nudge it open. Sugar spilled onto the counter, and Max licked a little, sneezing at the sweetness. Now it was time to mix. Max used his paws to paddle the mixture, just like Mrs. Harper did. The dough was sticky and squishy, and it clung to his fur. Max kneaded and folded, trying his best to make it smooth. When he finished, he shaped the dough into a lumpy ball and placed it in a baking pan. Max remembered that the dough needed to rise. He covered it with a kitchen towel and waited. And waited. And waited some more. Waiting was the hardest part. Max lay down with his chin on his paws, staring at the dough, willing it to grow. After a while, Max peeked under the towel. The dough had puffed up just a little. Max was so proud. He nudged the pan towards the oven. He knew ovens were hot, so he didn't get too close. Instead, he barked softly, hoping someone would come help. Mrs. Harper woke to the sound of Max's bark. She walked into the kitchen and stopped in surprise. There was flour everywhere, sugar on the counter, and most importantly, a lumpy loaf of bread dough in a pan. "Oh, Max!" Mrs. Harper laughed, kneeling beside him. "Did you try to bake bread all by yourself?" Max wagged his tail and barked softly. He was a little nervous. What if it wasn't good enough? Mrs. Harper scooped him up in a warm hug. "You are a clever puppy, Max. Let's finish baking together." Together, they slid the pan into the oven. The kitchen filled with the scent of baking bread once more. When the bread was ready, Mrs. Harper pulled it from the oven. It wasn't perfect. It was lumpy and a little crooked, and flour dusted the top like snow. But to Max, it was the most beautiful loaf in the world. Mrs. Harper cut a slice and handed it to Max. He tasted it, and though it was a little chewy and a bit sweet, it was delicious, because he had made it himself. That evening, the Harper family sat around the table, sharing Max's very own bread. Sophie clapped her hands in delight. "Max, you did it! You're a real baker now!" Max's heart swelled with happiness. He knew he still had a lot to learn, but with every loaf, he would get better. From then on, Max became Mrs. Harper's true baking partner. Each day, he would help her gather ingredients, mix dough and shape loaves. Sometimes the bread was perfect. Sometimes it was a little wonky, but every loaf was made with love and a wagging tail. Word spread through the town about the puppy who could bake. Children would stop by the bakery after school, hoping to catch a glimpse of Max in his tiny chef's hat, helping behind the counter. Mrs. Harper's bakery became even more popular, not just for the delicious bread, but for the joy and laughter that filled the shop. One chilly autumn morning, the mayor of the town visited the bakery. He watched as Max and Mrs. Harper prepared a batch of pumpkin bread. When the bread was ready, the mayor took a bite and smiled. "This is the best bread I've ever tasted," he declared. "Max, you are a very special puppy indeed." From that day on, Max became known as Max the Baking Puppy. He even had his own apron, embroidered with his name and a tiny loaf of bread. But to Max, the best part of baking wasn't the fame or the praise. It was the time spent with his family. the laughter and stories shared in the warm, flower-dusted kitchen, and the simple joy of creating something special for the people he loved. And as the seasons changed, Max learned new recipes: sweet rolls in the spring, blueberry muffins in the summer, apple pies in the fall, and cinnamon bread in the winter. With each new treat, Max grew more confident, more skilled, and even more helpful. One snowy evening, as the wind howled outside and the fire crackled in the hearth, Sophie snuggled close to Max. She whispered, "Thank you for baking with us, Max. You make every day brighter." Max wagged his tail and licked her cheek, knowing he had found his true place in the world, not just as a puppy, but as a baker, a helper, and a friend. And so, in the heart of Maple Lane, in a cozy yellow house filled with love and laughter, Max the baking puppy continued to bake, to learn, and to share his special magic with everyone he met. For in every loaf of bread, in every roll and bun, there was a piece of Max's heart. A reminder that with a little patience, a lot of love, and a wagging tail, even the smallest among us can do something wonderful. Every Saturday, the bakery held a special event called Puppy Baking Day. Children from all over town would gather in the shop, eager to see Max in action. Mrs. Harper would hand out tiny aprons and rolling pins, and Max would lead the way, showing everyone how to knead dough with gentle paws and sprinkle flour with care. One day, a shy boy named Ethan came to the bakery. He watched quietly from the corner, unsure if he could join in. Max noticed Ethan and trotted over, nuzzling his hand with a soft nose. Ethan smiled, and slowly, he joined the other children at the table. With Max's encouragement, Ethan helped shape a loaf of bread. At first, his hands trembled, but Max gave a reassuring bark. Together, they pressed and folded the dough, laughing as flour dusted their faces. When the bread was baked, Ethan tasted his slice and grinned from ear to ear. "I did it!" he exclaimed. Max barked happily, licking Ethan's hand in celebration. From that day on, Ethan became a regular at the bakery, just like many other children who found confidence and joy through baking with Max. As the years passed, Max grew from a playful puppy into a wise, gentle dog. He knew every recipe by heart and could sense when the dough was just right or when the bread needed a few more minutes in the oven. Mrs. Harper often said, "Max, you're not just a baker, you're the heart of our home." And so, the little yellow house on Maple Lane remained a place of warmth, laughter, and the wonderful smell of fresh bread. A place where a puppy learned to bake, and where dreams, big and small, could come true. The end.